Jovan Buha! Buha!
Yo, I'm Jovan Buha, Lakers beat writer for The Athletic, and welcome to another episode of Buha's Block. On today's show, I'm thrilled to be joined by Sean Davis to discuss the second half regular season grades for the Lakers, as well as their playoff grades. Sean, how are you doing today, my man?
Doing good. Glad to be back on, and excited to break down these Lakers players here.
Are you excited? I think it gets a little grim in the playoffs.
Especially when you get eliminated early. You feel like you ran out of content.
So last time we spoke was previewing the Lakers' potential first-round playoff matchups, and we both had Minnesota as the second best matchup for the Lakers, and that did not age well.
No. Who's won? Memphis?
Memphis, yeah. I mean, they would have beaten Memphis in like 5 games tops. Might have been a sweep. But for the purposes of today, we're going to be judging players, 2 separate regular season and postseason grades. The regular season grades are for the final 41 games of the regular season. So that's from January 22nd on. Interestingly, that is the game. It starts with the game that the Lakers beat the Boston Celtics, which was, remember, before that game, AD comes out, has the ESPN interview with Shams about wanting to play the 4 more, wanting center next to him, and how he has told the Lakers and the front office this repeatedly, and they have not addressed it. And then within about a week and a half, AD gets traded for Luka Doncic. So we have January 22nd on, and then the 5-game playoff series. We're going to be factoring in contract, age, role, previous production, and expectations. A+ through F grades. Though, spoiler alert, no player is going to be getting an A+, at least from me. We will not be grading Shake Milton, Markieff Morris, Alex Len, Maxi Kleber, or Bronny James. And we are not going to be grading Dalton Knecht for the playoffs just because he only played in garbage time. Any opening thoughts with the grades and just this exercise overall?
No, I'm excited. I am excited. I'm curious to see where this conversation goes.
Let's get into it. So we're going to start with LeBron. And for me, I gave LeBron an A for the second half of the regular season and a B for the playoffs. Quickly reading through some stats here. Second half of the regular season for LeBron, 25.3 points per game, 8.2 rebounds, 7.3 assists, 1.1 steals, 51% shooting, 35% on threes. So that dipped in the second half compared to the first half. He was close to 40%, 60% true shooting, minus 2.2 on off. Summary. So Lakers are 2.2 points per 100 possessions better with LeBron off the floor than on, but that was better than the first half number, averaged just under 35 minutes per game. And then in the playoffs, 25, 9, and 6, 2 steals, 49% shooting, 36% on threes, 60% true shooting. So maintained a similar level of shooting between the regular season and the playoffs, but a minus 21.8 on off summary. So Lakers are 21.8 points per 100 possessions better with LeBron off than on. That was the second worst mark among the rotation. I guess technically third worst. Jaxson was worse, but I don't know how we include Jaxson in all this and how we assess that. But minus 21.8 points per 100 possessions and average 41 minutes a game. So A in the regular season for LeBron, B in the playoffs. What do you think of those grades? Do you agree? Do you disagree?
Maybe it's just me, like my takeaway from the playoffs. I feel like maybe you're underrating Bron's playoff performance. Like I honestly would kind of like bump down the regular season grade slightly and bump up the postseason grade slightly, even if it was like A-, B+. Because I look at the playoffs, and I think a lot of the LeBron on-off stuff is. And I kind of talked about this in a separate video on the Lakers channel, and it was basically that I think this was about the trio, LeBron, Austin, and Luka. Like, can they work or whatever? And going into some of the on-off numbers where you compare, or like, okay, it's Luka and LeBron or Luka and Austin and vice versa. I honestly think that the problem with the on-off stuff with these guys is that, like, they just don't have consistent guys to put with them. honestly. And that's why I think a lot of the lineups, at least currently, and with the current iteration of the team, a lot of the lineups that worked were mostly, okay, Luka, Austin, and we're going to get Dorian and, fill out the rest of basically the lineup with bigger wings or a big or whatever. Wait, never mind. Bigs don't exist. Or, even Luka by himself. Like, the Luka by himself lineup could be dreadful at times because it's just like no offense. It's like Luka, Gabe, Goody, DFS, and I don't even remember who the fifth guy is. Maybe it's Rui. But like that lineup, if we're going like net rating, was a pretty fine lineup comparatively speaking to like some of the other lineups being played. And I do think there is a noticeable, and maybe I'm like putting too much stock into the injury. I do think there was a noticeable like period post injury. It was like, okay, we are clearly just trying to get to the playoffs. And maybe for me, that kind of docks the grade just a little bit. So again, like A-. I think before the injury, LeBron was at an all NBA first team level objectively, I think. And then post injury, it was very clearly like, all right, dog, we're just trying to get to the playoffs healthy and we'll just figure it out from there. And then the playoffs, I thought he was pretty consistently a one of their few defensive positives. I thought he was a pretty positive defensive player for them in the playoffs, like his activity. Specifically game 4, I think it was. Really game 3 and 4 specifically, honestly. They were like memorable plays from both games. And then I forgot. What did he shoot from 3 in the playoffs?
About 36%, 35.7%.
Yeah, so I don't know. Maybe that's just me. But I would personally go at A-, B+.
We're close there. I think for me, when I originally did it, I gave him a B+ for the playoffs, but there were a couple of things that docked it for me. I just look at, they were 28 points per 100 possessions worse defensively with him on. And like, that's just a jarring number that no one else in the rotation is close to. And of course it's a 5-game sample, which things can be swung in, but like, that's just all we're going off of. So for me, I originally went through and I gave him a B+. I also think like, Game 1 was really rough. It was one of the worst LeBron playoff games I can remember, in my opinion. Now you factor in the age and like, sometimes LeBron has these feel out game 1s. I also thought Game 5 was relatively rough. His counting stats were there, but I just didn't think he came out with the level of urgency that the Lakers needed in that game. To your point though, games 3 and game 4 were awesome. Like Game 3 was by far his best game in the series. He put the team on his back. Luka was sick, and he had a not even vintage, just like an awesome LeBron performance. I agree with you defensively. Overall, I thought he largely played well for the series. It's just, it's kind of hard to separate some of the lack of success with him on the floor with compared to him off. Now, he did play a lot, so like, we're talking about a very small sample size here, but that's all we have to base this off of. In terms of the regular season, like they went 27-14 over this 41 game stretch. He wore several hats, including playing both center and point guard for stretches. Like this includes the stretch where AD gets injured and LeBron has the New York performance, and he just had an awesome road trip during that stretch. And like, he was their defensive captain and leader for most of this stretch. I do agree that like, maybe I'm not factoring in the post-injury LeBron version enough. He was not up to his standards during that portion of the season, but I voted for him 5th in MVP and 5th in All NBA, like gave him that 5th spot. So I was very high on his regular season, and I think there was like a leadership and urgency element to it all that is hard to quantify, but from watching the group every day and being around them every day, it was like, I thought LeBron really carried them in a way that it didn't matter. Remember, like this was Vando comes back. The DFS is still ramping up. At first, he was on a minutes restriction. You have Rui get injured. You have the AD Luka trade. Like you have all these moving parts with this group. And the 3 through lines, in my opinion, were JJ and especially his defensive game plans, LeBron and Austin. And I think LeBron arguably was the biggest leg of the 3. So, I mean, I'm with you. I was between an A and an A- for the regular season, and I was between a B and a B+. I ended up going A and B, but I think we're pretty close in how we view it.
Yeah. Yeah, that's fair.
Let's get into Luka now. So Luka was a tough one for me because I feel like based on his standards and
You're probably lowering it then. Yeah.
probably, so I went back and forth. I'll just tell you the grades. I gave him an A- for the regular season and a B+ for the playoffs. I gave him the highest playoff grade because I thought outside of game 3, when he could barely hold any food down and just was visibly not himself on either side of the basketball, he was awesome in the other 4 games, I thought, for the most part, at least offensively. Like this is one of they were 26 points per 100 possessions better offensively with Luka on than off. They had an 85.7 offensive rating in the 32 minutes he was off the floor. So like their offense completely cratered. They could not score against Minnesota when Luka was off the floor. But quickly to read through his stats in the regular season: 28, 8 and 8, 1.6 steals, 44% shooting, 38% on threes, 59% true shooting, plus 12.9 on off, 35 minutes per game. In the playoffs, 30 points, 7 rebounds, 6 assists, 1 steal, 45% shooting, 35% on threes, 61% true shooting. So his true shooting actually went up in the playoffs, plus 11.8 on off and 42 minutes a game. So I know the defense and the conditioning, and I get that. And I think the offense became too one-dimensional and predictable, especially in these fourth quarters where they just could not score consistently. At the same time, once Luka became a Laker, this team could not score when he was off the floor. They really struggled offensively. And part of that's like, it kind of reminds me a little bit of Jokic in Denver, where Denver is so dependent on Jokic that like the non-Jokic minutes can be rough. That's kind of what started to happen with the Lakers and Luka. But yeah, I was between a B+ and an A- for the regular season, and then a B and a B+ for the playoffs. But I thought he was awesome offensively. The defensive end is where there were some notable concerns, we'll say.
I think the thing with Luka is like such a weird discussion is that the things that you could very easily poke holes at outside of the conditioning, I think you could also give him a lot of benefit of the doubt for, like the defense, for example, right? One of my biggest pet peeves throughout the entire series was that they would just consistently concede switches with 18 seconds left on the shot clock. So now, like, okay, yes, Luka is a bad defender or a horrendous one-on-one defender. I think he's actually a pretty fine team defender, actually.
I agree.
But he's a really bad one-on-one defender. And okay, cool. We're just gonna, arguably the most explosive player in basketball in a straight line. Yeah, we're just gonna give him a switch with said Luka and let him operate with 18 seconds. It doesn't even matter, like you're zoning up or whatever on the far side. Like that doesn't even matter at this point. We're just immediately giving a blow by with 3/4 of the shot clock to work with. So like I get the frustration with them defensively, but at the same time, I'm like, the Lakers could have done something to help him out at the very least, or to like not flat out concede switches. I look at the way the Warriors protect, in air quotes, I guess, Steph, where, okay, cool. If you're going to switch on Steph, you're going to work for a legit 10 seconds to get that switch. And now you're operating with 8 seconds on the shot clock as opposed to almost the entire shot clock once you cross half court. Or even like there's a lot of talk about the playmaking and, oh man, is this kind of the formula to slow down Luka's playmaking? He's had 2 back-to-back lower playmaking volume series. And there are some arguments I think are fair, but also at the same time, I'm like, honestly, I just think I've kind of come to the conclusion is if we're talking about Luka's playmaking, I don't think he's a 5-out player where it's just, okay, cool, we're going to space the floor. We're going to have 5 shooters, which is basically what it was. It was a lot of, literally in game 4, or was it game 3? I honestly forget. Game 4, where it's Dorian, Rui, Braun, Austin, like LeBron. Luka. We're just running 5 out with 5 shooters, essentially. That's the goal. And for Luka's playmaking, I just don't think he's that kind of player. He's not Tatum in that sense, where Tatum's best asset as an offensive player is his rim pressure, and that like leverages into Tatum's playmaking and his advantage creation, where Luka's playmaking and what makes him like the all-time level playmaker is Luka, if he's able to manipulate the low man consistently, which is why you need your Daniel Gafford or your Nick Claxton or et cetera. I mean, Jaxson Hayes to a certain extent. Very, 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 very lesser extent. Good God. But like,
We're gonna touch on that.
like that's why you need that player with Luka, because now it's legitimate lob threat rolling behind us. Okay, crap. Now we're tagging on the roll, and now Luka gets to manipulate that low man or whatever. Like that's where he's the best player of all time at that. There's not a passer or a playmaker rather that manipulates the low man better than Luka Doncic does, arguably ever. And when you have, and Boston's the one team that can kind of slow that down. I don't think Minnesota did anything to stop that. It's just the Lakers were in 5 out the entire series, and they don't have the athletic rim threat, where Boston is just unique, and Boston has 6'9" switchable wings and guards across the board. And not Drew or Derek, but they're both very, switchable guards. So I'm just going to agree, because I think the Luka conversation is a little bit more advanced, and because I think you have to really, really like you can criticize, but yeah.
I'm going to interject here and throw this at you because I thought this was telling. The Lakers, we'll just say they had a 9-man rotation for the most part in the playoffs. Like Jordan Goodwin averaged under 8 minutes a game, so you could say like 8.5, whatever. But of those 9 players, 5 of them had more fouls than field goals made in the series. And I think you could guess who the 4 guys who had more makes than fouls were.
Yep.
It was LeBron, Luka, Austin, and Rui. The other 5 guys had more fouls than field goals made. So, like, I'm not trying to absolve any of their top 4 from criticism or critique or holding them under a microscope, but it's like, at some point, you need your role players to make shots. You need your role players to make plays. You need your role players to attack closeouts and make the right decision. Mm-hmm. And the Lakers just did not have that consistently outside of their 4 best players and 4 primary offensive players. So, I mean, I just look at DFS, 17 fouls to 12 made shots. Vando, 9 fouls to 2 made shots. Gabe, 8 fouls. He made 2. Gabe 8 to 5. Jaxson 8 to 3. Jordan Goodwin 7 to 1. It's like you have several guys who didn't even make 5 shots in a 5-game series. Like that's not even 1 shot a game. It's like they basically were a 4-man offense, and part of that you could put on JJ and the system. Part of that you could put on Luka and maybe how he plays. Austin obviously did not have the series that he needed to have. But like at some point, I'm like, if you look at the way that OKC's role players have played up to this point, you look at the way even Minnesota's role players have played up to this point. Like the Lakers were barely getting to like 5 playable players in this series, and all of those teams had like 7 to 10. So I just think that to me was the biggest gap overall. And again, it's not to absolve anyone else of blame or criticism. It's just, it's like Luka's averaging 8 assists a game if there's a couple more makes a game.
Yeah.
And like he was creating those opportunities, maybe not to the level that he needed to be at. But I think part of this was like a lot of these guys just didn't make shots.
Yeah. So I'm just going to agree. I think it's a little bit more complicated with Luka personally.
I think where this conversation is going to take an interesting turn is this next one. We have Austin Reaves. So in the regular season, I give Austin an A, second half of the regular season specifically. So this is post D'Lo trade. I think he emerged as one of the best, if not arguably the best, number 3 option in the league offensively. For factoring in defense, that's where guys like Evan Mobley, Chet, and even Evan Mobley's like arguably their number 2, but I guess offensively he's more of their number 3. We could get into some debates as to like where Austin was at in the regular season, but I think he was arguably the best number 3 option offensively. Averaged 22 points a game over this stretch. So give him an A. The playoffs, I'm giving him a C, and I think that is going to be higher than a lot of people would give him. I think a lot of people would give him D+ or lower, maybe even an F. I think there's been a lot of overreaction to Austin and the Austin discourse and his performance in this series. To quickly read through the numbers, regular season, final 41 games, 22 points a game, 5 rebounds a game, 5.5 assists, 22, 5 and 5, 1.1 steals, 48% shooting, 39% on threes, 64.5% true shooting, plus 5.3 on off in 35 minutes a game. In the playoffs, dropped to 16.2 points per game, 5.4 rebounds per game, actually averaged more rebounds per game, 3.6 assists, 0.2 steals. That's very telling. He was not the defensive playmaker that he was in the regular season. 41% shooting, 31.9% three-point shooting, 53% true shooting, which, fun fact, the Lakers only had 3 players in this series have an above average true shooting percentage. It was Luka, LeBron, and Rui. Everyone else was at least 3% below league average. Minus 11.1 on off in 39 minutes per game. So an A for Austin in the second half of the regular season, a C in the playoffs. What do you make of those grades?
I think I'm going to lean like C minus to C plus range for the playoffs for Austin. I will say this about Austin. I think Austin on both sides of the fence is like is arguably the most frustrating player to talk about on the Lakers, because you have the one side of the fence, like you said, it's kind of super overreactionary. That's like, oh my goodness, Austin sucks. You need to trade him for Herb Jones. I'm like, okay, that's nothing against Herb Jones, but I just don't think Herb Jones makes sense for the current version of the Lakers, where LeBron is 40 and you're asking LeBron to be your 82 game plus second option. Just doesn't make sense, in my opinion, at least. Or not even Herb Jones for, I'm sure you saw said tweet, the backup centers.
That's
like, I think that there are a lot of overreactions to Austin, and I think with the benefit of hindsight, it is kind of interesting to look back on the series knowing Austin was playing on an injury that caused Darius Garland to miss 4 straight games, and when Darius Garland did return to the playoffs, he was very clearly like not himself still, just in terms of his motions and his ability to make sharp angles and cuts and stuff like that. Different bodies, so somewhat different injury, but like same medically described injury at the very least. And Austin played through that the entire series, so it is interesting to kind of look back on that now. Look back on Austin's series with that kind of in mind. I will say this though. This is the one thing that I do think is somewhat concerning now about Austin in terms of his playoff offense and just playoff reputation. His jumper just goes away in the playoffs. Like last year, the midi was like on fire. Actually, just pull up situations in general for Austin last year, he was great. He shot 38.5% on pull up threes against Denver in the playoffs. Made 68% of his pull up twos last year against Denver on pretty decent volume. He shot more pull-up twos than he did pull-up threes in that series. But he shot 15.5% on catch-and-shoot threes against Denver last year, which on that year, that team specifically definitely was a little bit more in an off-ball role or played off-ball a lot. And then this year even shot 33% on catch-and-shoot threes. He shot 29% on pull-up threes. So there's something to it. And even like the 23 conference finals run, I feel like there was some inconsistencies in terms of his shot variance, even though that was definitely the better, the best run AR has had from a shooting standpoint. So I do think there's something there, at least with Austin. Like, that's the one thing I will negatively draw back on from the playoffs is, okay, dog, our shot can't keep disappearing come April. And regular season wise, I have no gripes whatsoever. I think Austin was awesome. I think, and this is where I again go back to the overreaction point. I think anybody that looks at the current landscape of the NBA and the way guards are getting there's no way you don't think Austin is like in the right for the rumor that he's gonna not do his extension this summer, opt out of his player option next year, and try to get a deal of $30+ million. There's no way we can like sit here and say that Austin's not in the right for that.
I'll say it's not a rumor. He's not signing that extension.
Yeah,
and I might get aggravated on that, but like he's not going to sign that extension, and nor should he.
Nor should he. There's like 10 guards I can think of right now that I'm like, yeah, Austin is at least in their pay range. So shout out Austin. He had a great regular season. Benefit of hindsight, you can kind of give him a little bit more benefit of the doubt for the playoffs, but I'm still going to go like C minus C.
To add to the regular season discourse, I thought he grew a lot as a pick and roll practitioner, as a playmaker, as a ball handler, as a decision maker. He took on a lot of tough guard assignments after they traded Max away, and he became, in some ways, that starting point of attack guy, which I don't think is the optimal role for him defensively, but I thought he held up fairly well in several matchups against star level guys, and he's done that in the past before. I think really with him, the big thing defensively is he can struggle, obviously, when he's switched onto a Julius Randle, even a Jaden McDaniels, who had arguably his best series as a Timberwolf, at least offensively, against the Lakers. Like, that's where Austin can struggle against a Naz Reid, a Randle, a McDaniels, like those types of guys who can just overpower him. But against guards, I think he for the most part, does a pretty good job on the ball. But several games he stepped up as the number 2 or even the number 1 option with LeBron and or Luka or AD out. I think of the Indiana game when he dropped 45, and that's a team that's looking like they're probably going to make the finals. The Denver game without 6 of their top 8 guys, and he goes off for, I think, 37, and they nearly win that game. The Chicago game where you have Luka and LeBron on the floor and they are running the offense through Austin late and he is delivering clutch play after clutch play. They end up losing that game. The Josh Giddey half-court shot, but like that's not on Austin. And I think there were times even where the Lakers looked better with like one of the stars plus Austin compared to all 3 together, or even Luka and LeBron together. So I think regular season, he was a big part of the 27-14 turnaround, them earning the number 3 seed. Now, come playoff time, I think there's some context we have to factor in here. Like, I think Minnesota was arguably the worst matchup for Austin in the league. I think OKC you could throw in there as like a contender as well.
Would be the worst one.
OKC's probably the one, but Minnesota's right up there with Nickeil Alexander-Walker, Jaden McDaniels, Ant, and then having Rudy Gobert as a rim protector, just a lot of size and physicality. That was a really tough matchup for him. I think he's been scapegoated a little bit, and we know, like, I think there's levels here where like this was not D'Lo against Denver. There was no 0 point on 0 for 7 shooting performance, and at the same time, Austin was guarding Ant. If you actually look at the matchup data, which I know can be a bit wonky, there's some noise with that. He actually defended Ant well, and I don't know that I would go as far as to say like he like shut him. He did not shut him down, or he did not even slow him down necessarily. But compared to the options that the Lakers had, he arguably held up the best of any option they had one-on-one versus Ant. And I'm going to throw this at you, and I'm interested to get your reaction to this. For all the talk about Austin's struggles with his shooting, and look, 41 and 32 in terms of shooting splits, that's not going to cut it. And the turnovers, especially in Game 5, he's still, up to this point in the playoffs, is the 5th highest number 3 scorer among any of the 16 playoff teams. So the 4 like I went through each team and looked at their scoring averages. Derek White at 19 points a game.
For this playoff run?
Derek White, 19 points a game. Evan Mobley, 17 points a game. Zubac, 17 points a game. Chet Holmgren, 16.5 points a game. And with 3 of those 4 teams, they did not have another 20-point scorer where the Lakers had 2 25-plus scores. So point being, for as much has been made about Austin and his offensive struggles or whatnot, and him not delivering as a number 3 option, he was right there behind Chet Holmgren, Evan Mobley, Ivica Zubac as like the highest scoring number 3s. And I know there's more to the game, obviously, than just raw points, but like to some extent, he's being judged just on that 16 point per game number, right there with Aaron Gordon, who had one of the best playoff runs of his career, arguably the best playoff run of his career. And, you know, so I'm not trying to say that Austin had a good series. I gave him a C. That is not a good grade, and he did not live up to the number 3 billing. And I think if the Lakers got the regular season version of Austin in this series, they push this to at least 6, if not 7. So like I do hold his feet to the fire more than I do Luka or LeBron. at the same time, I think there's just some false narratives about this series with him. Like I even look at the turnovers. He only had 2 games with more than 2 turnovers, and he only had 2 turnovers in one game. He had 2 games with 1 turnover, 1 game with 2, and then 1 with 4, 1 with 6. So like, I feel like even the turnovers and the defense have just been blown a little bit out of proportion. And we don't have to have the do you trade Austin or not conversation, but like, I come back to this series and how much this group struggled offensively. And I'm like, take Austin off this team and put a Jalen Suggs or put a Herb Jones or whoever you want to try to trade him for. This group is going to be worse offensively. Like they will have worse ball handling. They will have worse playmaking. They will have worse secondary shot creation. Like this group needs more ball handling, more guys who can score, more guys who can attack closeouts. And I think if you take away the number 3 guy on this team offensively, like everyone else is slotted, I think, a little bit too high offensively. And if you make Jalen Suggs or Herb Jones or whoever the number 3, and then try to replace Austin with like a minimum guard or even a tax MLE guard, I don't think that works. And I think this group, if anything, was worse offensively than like they should have been. And I don't think you solve that by trading Austin.
I think the thing with Austin is his floor as an offensive player is ridiculously high. Like we're talking about like Austin after the series, like the sky is falling, and he still averaged 16, and his worst game in the series was a 12-point outing where he couldn't hit anything, and he had 6 turnovers in Game 5. But
Game 5 and Game 1 were both bad for him.
Yeah,
like Game 1 was his worst game of the season, arguably. Game 5 was also in that conversation.
Yeah, but still put like box score wise, at least he's still giving you 16, and he still give you 12. And that's his floor. And that I'm kind of just looping that back to your original statement about like this is not a D-Lo against Denver. Like this is your floor, and this is probably Austin's worst series as a Lakers so far.
I think so.
But again, like this is the floor. Like that's awesome.
He was still 16, 5 and 5. Like again, I know. Like I'm a big advanced metrics guy. His PER was I believe a 9. His turnover percentage was a 15. That's too high for him. I get it. I get the critiques. I just think it's like I feel like a lot of times we come out of these series and people want to have someone to blame. And I think it's been a combination of Austin
There's
and
other
JJ.
guys to blame.
There's other guys to blame more, in my opinion. That's just my point.
Yeah.
He was not good, but he was not like catastrophically bad, like tanking the team. That's more so my point. But let's move on to Rui. Rui for me gets a B+ in the regular season and a B in the playoffs. Quickly, his numbers: 14.6 points per game, 4.7 rebounds, 1.3 assists, 53% shooting, 41.5% 3-point shooting, 65.6 true shooting percentage, which is ridiculous, plus 8.8 on off in just under 31 minutes a game. In the playoffs, pretty similar numbers: 14.8 points, 4.6 rebounds, 49% shooting, 48.4% on threes, 63.4% true shooting. I'm gonna throw at you the wonky lineup data: minus 32.3 on off for Rui, which was the worst number on among the rotation guys, 36.4 minutes per game. So similar to the LeBron conversation, I originally had Rui as a B+ in the playoffs. I bumped it down to a B because of the on off, and I think that the rebound for me, the rebounding is still just a thing where like if he's going to be playing the 4 and the 5 at starting level minutes, he needs to be a better rebounder. And I think that was a big factor in Rudy Gobert having the performance he had in Game 5. At the same time, he shot the shit out of the ball. He was awesome offensively. As I mentioned, one of the only, if not the only, reliable role players offensively for this group. So Rui was a tough, like I was between a B+ and an A- in the regular season and between a B and a B+ in the playoffs. I went B+ and B. What do you make of that?
I think that's totally fair. I don't want this to sound, maybe this is like comparing to my own previous thoughts about Rui, and kind of my expectation of Rui. I'm going BB personally, But
I almost went there, but yeah.
I've always felt lower on Rui. And one of my biggest pet peeves, and maybe this is like, I would argue if there's any individual role player, or screw it, we'll go any player on the entire roster. If there's any player that I think has benefited the most from the team change sent with adding Luka, like schematically or just in terms of how they're offensively, at least in terms of how the makeup of the team is, I think is very clearly Rui. One of my biggest pet peeves about Rui, and I said this a lot earlier in the year, is like, okay, I think it was around a 40% three-point shooter at the beginning of the year. I'm like, dog, nobody cares. You shoot 3 threes a game. I'm going to live with that's why teams kept leaving him open. Because you're taking 3 threes a game. We're going to live with 1.2 threes you're going to make a game. There's just there's no margin for like a higher variance performance from Rui because you're not taking enough threes. And if that's going to be a role that got like, dude, you got to get him up. And you'll get your game 2 where he shoots 0 for 2 from 3 or whatever. You'll get, like, there's a couple performances down the stretch of the season. Like, he shot 1 for 6 from 3 in their March 31st game against Houston. Shot 1 for 8 from 3, first game out of the All-Star break against Charlotte where nobody could hit anything. But you get with the higher variance and shooting is having a higher volume from 3, you get your games 4 and 5 where he couldn't miss. And now, like, that just changes everything up coverage-wise for you. And for a Lakers team that really, really wanted to play 5 out, it's not 5 out if the 5 guys are really just pull at all times. Like, I think JJ very clearly takes a lot from Boston and Joe Mazzulla. If we're taking a lot from Boston and Joe Mazzulla, all 5 dudes on Boston are pulling, like, at all times from anywhere. And I think that was, like, the biggest sign for me. I was really, really excited to see him like just improve on the volume and take more because now you get your game 4, game 5. I think it was also just noticeably better off the catch too, like down the stretch in the season and playing on like second side stuff. Still have the same concerns, like you said, the rebounding being the biggest one with Rui, and yeah, that's the biggest one. I think defensively played like okay, like perfectly average. I thought he competed. He was one. If it wasn't Austin, it was probably him, arguably with Ant a lot. And that presents its own set of challenges. So I'm going BB. This is actually the most positive I probably come out of a season about Rui Hachimura since like year 1. And I know that's only like a year, but if we go last year, all of last year, and the beginning of this year, I was very, very low on Rui. And I think like post Luka trade, basically, and into the playoffs, like this is the most positive I've felt about Rui in a while.
I agree. And I think in thinking about him and his fit within this group, he was a round peg trying to fit into a square hole. Like, he's a power forward. And I think he can be a starting level power forward. I think he's probably better suited as like a 6th, 7th man type, maybe a 6th man. But I think there are contexts in which, like, if you put him on OKC, like take out Chet, put Rui, obviously they're going to get worse, but like that infrastructure of if it's Rui next to Isaiah Hartenstein, J-Dub, Shea, and Dort, and Caruso, and Kason Wallace, yeah, I think Rui can be the 4, and like he can be your worst or second worst defender, whatever. If it's Minnesota, take out Randall, put Rui. You could play him next to Gobert, McDaniels, Ant, Dante DiVincenzo, etc. But I think he needs like more help defensively. And I just think the Lakers relied on him for a role. Like, it was basically him and Austin were playing out of position where you want Austin as the secondary backcourt defender. You don't want Austin as the primary backcourt defender. You want Rui as the secondary or even third front court defender, not the primary front court defender. And he was often put in positions where he had to guard the top perimeter scorer, be it a wing or even sometimes a big guard. And I just don't think that is within his skill set. I think he did as well as he could within that. And that's where I give him some grace with this grade and just like a hat tip to his efforts defensively and his growth defensively. I think, again, 40% 3-point shooting back-to-back seasons. I think that's legit now. I think he established himself as the 4th best player. Like when they first traded for DFS, I was clamoring for DFS to start, and DFS was on the minutes restriction because of the ankle injury that he was dealing with. And I didn't really get it, but as we got a larger sample size with this group, I switched over to Rui's the fourth best player. He is the right guy to be starting, and like the starting group was working until it didn't. Now, come playoff time, you hit on something that I think really stood out to me. Like a lot of his numbers were carried by game 4 and game 5.
Yeah.
First 3 games, all single digit scoring, averaged 9 points a game on 40% shooting, 39% 3-point shooting. So 3-point numbers good, but they needed more from him offensively in the first 3 games. Last 2 games, 23 points per game, 56% shooting, 56% on threes. So like those numbers are like his overall series numbers. Like you see the almost 15 points a game, the 48% 3-point shooting, and it's a small sample size, as we've been saying for like, it's hard to really gauge any of these guys in like a 5-game sample. But I felt if we are kind of giving each game its own weight, I think he had a couple of subpar games, like an okay game, and then a couple of good games. And I think they needed a little bit more from him, especially compared to what Minnesota was getting from Jaden McDaniels,
Nas.
Dante, Nas, like they needed more from Rui. But I don't, again, he was one of the only 4 guys in this series to have more field goals made than fouls. So like, I'm not putting this on Rui either. I'm just saying like, that's where I give him the B. Then you also look at the on-off data, and it was pretty bad. But overall, I think Rui was solid. I'm more optimistic about Rui as a like starting level player. I have more concerns with Rui as a starter on this team, just because I think you need, if you're going to have Luka and LeBron as your 2 tent poles, you need a wing, like a defensive wing around those two, a guy who can guard, I think 1 through 3, 1 through 4. And I don't think Rui is that guy. So I if they retain him, I think he's more of a bench player with this group, or needs to be more of a bench player. And that's where I think you have to potentially explore trades with him this summer. Let's get into DFS. So I actually had the exact same grades for DFS as I did for Rui. B+ in the regular season, B in the playoffs. I know my DFS grade's probably a little higher than some people would have. Like his numbers were basically the same between the regular season and the playoffs. His on-off was basically the same. He led the group in on-off. And I thought we saw like game 4, second half aside, they were better with DFS at center, or whoever you want, LeBron, Rui, whoever you're considering the 5 in those lineups. They were better with DFS on than Jaxson on. And like that was a consistent trend. And I think that there's some intangible things with DFS that you can't quite quantify in terms of his defense. Like he unlocked the Lakers centerless looks. If you look at before they acquired DFS, I don't know if you remember this, but like they were when it was like LeBron and Rui and like Max, Austin and D'Lo, or some combination like that, they were bad in those groups. And then DFS comes and it unlocks the DFS Rui LeBron trio as a front court. Like that's when they turned into an awesome centerless group. So DFS was a big part of that. His leadership in the locker room, one of the few like outspoken vocal guys in that locker room. I think he turned around the culture of this team. So I give him a B+ regular season, B in the playoffs. What do you make of that?
I'm going B regular season, C+ playoffs.
Okay.
I thought
why lower on the playoffs?
And maybe this is me just like over indexing on the some of the individual things that happened in the series. I just didn't come away from like the playoffs in general, that series against Minnesota, saying, like DFS was a difference maker, if that makes sense. Like I thought he was just perfectly solid. And then obviously like the situation in game 4. And maybe I honestly like to the point about like my thoughts on DFS in the series. Maybe it might just be like an over. Yeah, I think it is actually just an overexposure to like that centerless lineup. Honestly,
that's fair.
And it because of said overexposure. Then did they start it in game 5 too? They just went to it off rip because it said overexposure.
It didn't go well.
It didn't go well. Minnesota were able to just eventually, get the looks that they wanted, and LA was playing behind all of game 5. I think that kind of maybe just left a bad taste in my mouth. But I do agree that with the entire regular season, post getting Dorian had some games where he was just awesome. I do feel really, really good about him still. It's a as a chess piece defensively, specifically in the ability to switch kind of 3 through 5. I feel comfortable with Dorian switching 3 through 5. I do think that this series against Minnesota kind of showcased it. And I think we kind of thought this heading in that he's not the explosive guard defender. That in theory is more of a Vando thing, or, you don't really have anybody else outside of that for the explosive guard. But I thought Dorian was fine. I thought Dorian was fine in the playoffs. Fouled out in game 6. I'm sorry, fouled out in game 5. I thought his ability to make plays on the short roll in game 4 specific though was really, really good. The Lakers found something in game 4 with that a little bit with Dorian. So yeah, I don't even want to be negative about Dorian, to be honest with you. I thought like you said, I think he was a really, really, really big piece to the Lakers. They were starting to turn their season around, but then Dorian was the piece. Like, all right, cool, let's go. Like we're going to make a push.
He accelerated it. He's an amplifier. Like he amplified a lot of what they did. He just does all the small things that add up to winning. And I know there can be a lot of noise with plus minus, and it is a bit lineup dependent, and there's like a lot of context and circumstance that comes with it. But like DFS was just a plus minus beast. The Lakers were better with him on the floor in the regular season and in the playoffs. And I think at some point, like when there's enough of a sample size of him positively contributing to winning, I value that more than maybe like even for the series, he shot 37% on threes. I think he needed to take more threes. He was a bit passive, and that's arguably my biggest complaint with him. Just one of those guys that can sometimes get in his own head a little bit with his shot. Let's talk about Jaxson.
So how long do we have to talk about Jaxson?
We nice palate cleanser 45 minutes in. I gave him a B for the regular season and an F for the playoffs.
Yeah, I'm gonna go C plus F. Reason why I'm a little bit lower on the regular season is because there was a very, very clear shift. Like I want to say early March, maybe, where there was a point in February, like or post, like for like the month stretch, starting with what was the Knicks game you said it was, or was it Boston?
The Boston.
Okay, so basically, like from that point until I don't even know what the exact game is, but it felt like early March, where I'm like, hold on, like Jaxson
might have been the Knicks game. Like they played the Knicks and Boston again in that early March stretch. Like it kind of bookended it.
Yeah. Where I was like, oh, hold on, like Jackson's about to make some money. Like I thought he was playing legit. And I'm not gonna go starter, but I thought he was like legitimately looking like a really high level backup big for a month and a half. I thought this was peak play finishing Jaxson. I thought he was impacting possessions at the rim. This was also the same time where if you look at like lineup data over this stretch, the lineup data loved Jaxson Hayes for about a month and a half or two. Oh my God, they were Jaxson Hayes FC for about a month and a half. And then like immediate, like out of nowhere, like the defensive IQ that was somewhat building up just immediately fell off the face of the earth. Some of the like smaller mistakes, the not even smaller, some of the loud, annoying mistakes, like the illegal screens and the fouling at the rim, some of that stuff kind of came back, and it was very clear that JJ just like stopped. I don't even want to say believe. I'm going to use the word trust. That's a little bit less harsh maybe than believing in Jaxson. I think very clearly just stopped trusting Jaxson Hayes. Very clearly. And around the same time, then it just awful timing, led right into the playoffs, and he was also not good at the playoffs either. So yeah, we're just gonna go. He didn't play enough in the playoffs. Although
31 minutes in the 5 games, so that's tough. Didn't play in game 5.
Jaxson threw me under the bus. I think it was like after game 1, maybe. One of my takeaways, like, dog, we low-key need more Jaxson Hayes minutes, and then they do that in game 2, I think, and he was awful, and he was bad the rest of the season. It's like, all right, man.
I guess maybe I'm factoring in the growth a little bit more in terms of like, I thought he was looking like a starting level center for 6 weeks or so. And it coincided with the stretch where they led the league in defensive rating from like mid-January to early March, right before LeBron goes down in Boston. That was what the 24 game stretch. They go 20-4. Jaxson is starting most of that stretch. His defensive rating is incredible. The on-off stuff is great. He had some awesome stretches during there where He's switching, he's protecting the rim, he's rebounding better, as you said, like staying out of foul trouble, making smarter decisions defensively. He and Luka, like Luka's making him look like Tyson Chandler or DeAndre Jordan or Derek Lively offensively. So he looked great for that stretch. Then he turned into a pumpkin the final month of the regular season. You saw his minutes and role started to decrease. Then in the playoffs, this was something that Crangus and I did our Lakers Wolves preview, and I suggested I didn't think it was going to be a Jaxson series and that they were probably going to play him less, and he thought they were going to play him more, and like it ended up working. Like I will say though, this is where I hold this on JJ a little bit of like, I think they needed to find better ways to counter the switching and the way that Minnesota was guarding them. They never countered it in the regular, like they never figured out how to attack switching defenses in the regular season, and it translated into the playoffs. And it was like, they even admitted after game one, we thought they were going to play coverage with Jaxson and like we could get Jaxson going in a certain, because you saw, I think first couple plays of game one, like they're going at Luka Jaxson pick and roll, and they're trying to get Jaxson going because that was their strategy always, is like, let's get Jaxson a couple of lobs, and then it makes the defense sink in, and then that either allows one-on-one coverage for Luka, or it's going to create some secondary, swing passes or driving kicks for guys to either hit threes or attack closeouts. And they just never got Minnesota in the blender properly with Jaxson on the floor. And part of that is on him, I guess, for like maybe screening angles or timing or whatever. But you also have to put, I think, more of that on JJ and the coaching staff for failing to figure out how to attack switching defenses. And that was a problem. I mean, especially once they got Luka, that became more of a problem. But like I would even say pre-Luka, that was a bit of an issue.
It felt like less of an issue pre-Luka because teams were just playing drop on the Lakers.
Yeah.
Before
they didn't care. They didn't
care.
No.
Then they give Luka, it's like, oh no, we don't want to play drop now. And the Lakers switch counters was, all right, go cook in space. Like, what space? They're clogging every lane. Yeah, and I mean, you bring up Crangus. Like, I feel like me and Crangus both combined at like 3 different ways that could have countered the switch, and like repetitively counter switching and counter it to the point where you could get Minnesota out of it, get Minnesota to play coverage, and they just never did. So yeah, that's more of a JJ thing. I also think we're gonna put some blame on JJ a little bit here too. I don't like how he handled the Jaxson thing in general. I think, Jaxson reportedly he's upset at his role and things like that, and whatever the case may be. I would be more upset at like the fact that he just I'm not gonna say out of nowhere, but like I thought with the losing trust piece and kind of how that all went down, like I think we should have still probably went back to Jaxson to start game 5. Or at the very least, when it was very apparent very early in game 5 that Minnesota kind of just figured out the centerless lineup because we played it for 25 straight minutes in game 4, then I thought that should have been a clear indicator. Okay, cool, let's just go back to Jaxson. They never did. So I do think that's something to legitimately have a gripe with JJ about. But at the end of the day, I mean, I guess to JJ's defense, Jaxson does have to be better, and he wasn't good.
I don't remember if I even told you this, so I might be springing this on you in the moment, but I do want to talk about JJ before we wrap.
Oh, sweet.
So yeah, we'll touch on JJ's second half of the regular season and playoffs. I'll rattle through a few grades here, and then you can pick whichever player or players you want to hit on. But to close things, I went with Gabe, a C+ in the regular season, a D in the playoffs. Vando, a B- in the regular season and a B- in the playoffs. Dalton, a C+ in the regular season, did not grade him in the playoffs. And Jordan Goodwin, a B. Actually, I'll bump it to a B+ in the regular season and a B- in the playoffs. So I'm between a B- and a C+. But between Gabe, Vando, Dalton, and Goody, is there anyone you want to touch on?
I guess I'll touch on Gabe. There's one other player that I want to touch on, but that kind of loops into the larger JJ discussion, in my opinion. So I'll save that for later. Gabe sucks. No, God. Let me back up. That's gonna get me aggravated.
We'll edit that out.
The Gabe situation sucks. Good.
Okay, there we go.
The Gabe situation sucks because there's an argument that maybe Minnesota is also just an awful game matchup as well, and because of how LA kind of plays and their roster makeup. You're going to play your 3 stars a ton. And if you try to throw Gabe like a bone and give him some minutes, you're just getting only smaller in a matchup where you pretty clearly need like more size. So I'm going to give him some very, very slight benefit of the doubt in that regard. Like, I do think this is just a really awful matchup for Gabe for a couple of reasons I just mentioned. But I just think Gabe didn't provide any of the stuff that you really needed from him. In terms of secondary creation, be able to guard at the point of attack. Even when like the few moments it was like him on a Conley or him on a Dante even, I thought he lost those matchups for the most part. And I thought one of the things that I thought he did really, really well in Miami was just his help weak side communication and being somewhat of a defensive playmaker, like making plays defensively for the Lakers. I think to a certain extent you kind of saw that in the regular season. You would have those games where Gabe is getting deflections, he's active, or he is being a pest at the point of attack, or he's offering you something from a second side creation or catch a shoot opportunity look. And Gabe's always kind of been a streaky 3-point shooter. Like the month of March, Gabe couldn't miss, and then the month of April, he couldn't hit absolutely anything. So he was a streaky shooter almost all season. And then, like, basically, you got none of those things I talked about from Gabe in the playoffs. So, I agree with your grade on Gabe. And there's only one other player for me, but we can save that for JJ.
Yeah, quickly, just to run through these guys. For me, Gabe was just too feast or famine this season. It was like he would go 1 for 6 or 4 for 6, and it trended more toward 1 for 6 than 4 for 6. But like he just was way too hot or cold. I think on paper, he was supposed to be their 7th man, I guess, if we want to say DFS was the 6th man, but he just didn't play up to like if you look at OKC and Minnesota and Indiana and even New York and some of these teams that have made the conference finals or even made the second round, like he just was not up to the level of being the number 7 guy. Like to me, he looked more like a number 9 guy. And I know it sounds like a minor thing, but the Lakers are allocating a certain amount of money to him. And I just don't think he ever lived up. He's not lived up to his contract through the first couple of seasons. I think he's a good on-ball defender. He just is 6'2", maybe
6'1",
6'1", 6'2", and I think the switch, like there are some guys in my opinion who have been hurt by the switching scheme. And I think Gabe is one of them because I go back to I'm going to go way back. The 4th game of the season when they're in Phoenix and Kevin Durant is just picking on Gabe to close that game.
Oh, this is the game they lost in Phoenix.
They lost, and I think Phoenix had like a 15-point comeback or something crazy like that in the second half. And Lakers started the season 3-0, and it looked like they were about to go 4-0, and Phoenix down the stretch was just isoing with KD, picking on the switch with Gabe, and he was just hitting pull-up jumper after pull-up jumper on Gabe. And I think that was a preview of what was to come, not just with Gabe. I think we saw it, especially in the playoffs, with Austin and with Luka. Minnesota really targeted those 2 guys, but the Lakers conceding switches to the extent that they did, I think for a guy like Gabe, like again, I think he's a fire hydrant. He can be a good on-ball defender, but to me, he's much more of a cover. I'd much rather him be, rear view contesting and navigating screens than having to switch onto bigger guys who can just bulldoze through him or just shoot over him. There's a lot of just guys like rising Randall up over the top, guys rising up over him, and there's just nothing he can do. Or him getting cross matched with certain guys in the paint, and then all of a sudden it's Gabe trying to box out Rudy Gobert, and Rudy Gobert just jumps 12 inches and dunks the ball in on his head. Like there's nothing he could do about that. So I think he was a guy who, like, if you are going to go more switch heavy, you need a Nah, you need a Dante, like guys who are 2 to 3 inches bigger, have bigger wingspans, who are a little bit stronger and have more physical gifts and tools than Gabe. Because I think he does the best he can for his size. He's just limited as like a small backup guard. And then Vando, I think like his energy and defense and rebounding always stood out because this group lacked some of those physical tools and gifts. I just don't think he ever got back to 2023 or even 2024 pre-injury levels defensively. I think he also, like, athletically, I feel like he's not quite back to being the athlete he was before the double foot surgeries. I think he was a bit too chaotic, especially in the playoffs. On the one hand, they needed some of that. On the other hand, it sometimes went into like just getting into foul trouble unnecessarily. Like, I think about that Denver game where he did make an impact in those 6 minutes and he was frustrating Jokic, but like he fouled out or was in, I forgot if he fouled out or was in heavy foul trouble within like 6 minutes. It was within 6 minutes. And it was like, they could have used another 6 to 8 minutes from him, but like sometimes the chaos became unproductive. And then the biggest thing for me with him was he regressed as a finisher even more. Like he's that's already one of his weaknesses. People always talk about the shooting, and that is a big weakness. But the finishing around the basket and in the paint decreased this season, and it was already not good for a player of his size. I mean, he's functionally a center offensively. So it's like that decreasing to me just makes it even harder to play him. I know some of the on-off stuff was good in the playoffs, but he's a guy who he's just a tough fit, especially on that contract. And then Goody, I like the rebounding, the secondary ball handling, the screening. Could not make a shot in the playoffs. I also thought got one of the worst whistles I've ever seen a player get. Like he was getting some phantom calls in that series, but like, yeah, I mean, he for what it's worth, led the group in plus minus in or on off in, but like, I don't really count that. And then DK, I thought showed a lot of growth as a scorer and a shooter in the second half of the season. At the same time, I don't think he ever put together a consistent stretch really. I think he did clearly, you mentioned trust with Jaxson. Dalton clearly did not gain the trust of the coaching staff. There were several times JJ went viral for cussing out Dalton because he could not remember plays. Also defensively earned an F grade in B-ball indexes, defensive metrics, and was in the 1 percentile, which is a bad thing, in dunks and threes defensive EPM. I believe had the 5th worst mark out of 520 players in the league. Guess who had the worst mark? He was a Laker. Alex Len.
No, I don't know why it took me so long to get that. But
so, but there were some rookies in there, so I want to be fair to Dalton and not say like I don't know if he was a bottom 5 defender in the league, but like most defensive metrics painted him as one of the worst, a really destructive defender. So that's where like I know there's a lot of clamoring for him to play more, but I think people are overlooking just how bad he was defensively and how much the coaching staff did not trust him because of that. He's also 24, so I'm like, I've also seen a lot of like, well, he's a rookie, and like he should get better, but like he's already in his mid-20s. So I think like at some point he kind of is the defender that he is. He's got the physical tools. I just don't know if he's got the processing and the reading of the game at a high enough level. I mean, clearly offensively to some extent with the play remembering, but also defensively with how he sees the game. So he could make me eat my words, and I could be wrong on that, but like I think the Lakers would have loved to have had Dalton Knecht be a rotation player. It's just he could not get to the level, for them to trust him. But anything you want to add to any of those points I made?
No, not necessarily. I think those are all good points there.
All right, let's hit JJ. So this was a tough one. I gave him A- for the regular season, and just some quick numbers there. I didn't mention the numbers to the other guys because it didn't really matter, but Lakers went 27-14, 0.659 win percentage. That was the 4th best record in the West over that stretch. He helped them win 50 games, earned the number 3 seed. They were 10th in offense, 12th in defense, and 8th in net rating over that stretch. And then in the playoffs, 1 for 4, or 1 and 4, .200 wood percentage. They had the 12th best offense out of 16 teams, 12th best defense out of 16 teams, and 13th in net rating among the 16 teams. They were heavy favorites to win. They lost in 5. So I'm going A- regular season for JJ and C- in the playoffs.
I would go B+ regular season, although very close to A-. And then I went D+ for the playoffs for JJ. I think with JJ, I think there's some very clear things I think he's already established that he and co are really, really good at in terms of a staff. I thought, and we talked about this a little bit already, the regular season defensive game plans that I thought he put together, and we've talked about the marquee games: New York twice, Boston the first time, Denver obviously, Memphis when Memphis was kind of riding their hot wave earlier in January. OKC, yeah, there were several really, really big defensive game plans where there objectively was a lot of concern about what the Lakers going to do defensively against Jokic or Brunson or X player. And he did this, by the way, with roster wise. You look at your top 7, we'll just call it. You have a few very huge net negative defensive players in a vacuum, you would think. And for the most part, they were able to get a lot out of that. I thought he got the locker room to buy in pretty clearly. And one of the things I was never concerned about with JJ was his communication, at least in the regular season. There were some playoff stuff that you can maybe poke at, although I'm actually going to defend JJ with some of the playoff questions he received. Specifically the one that caused the blow up, if you will, and him storming off. I kind of sympathize with them, and at least I'm not knocking the question, knocking the reporter. I actually forget who asked the question. I know who it is. I'm not going to
say it, but yeah,
I understand where he's coming from at the very least in that moment. I think there are a lot of things that he kind of has to correct. I think the biggest thing is, for the love of God, can we solve some of these big offensive issues? I'm not even going to go organized offense. I could care less about organized offense in the moment. Can we please figure out how to beat switching? There are so many ways you could beat switching instead of, okay, let's go cook and let the defense just sit and shell for 20 seconds. I would say drop, and the only reason why drop wasn't as big of an issue down the stretch of the season is because teams stopped running drop against the Lakers because they have Luka, and Luka, that's the gift of having Luka Doncic, is he's a drop counter to a certain extent in and of itself. I think one of the biggest criticisms we have about JJ is his personnel usage or role usage even. I was kind of saving this for the Vando discussion a little bit. I couldn't stand how we were using Vando, because you would think what Vando's great at would make perfect sense for the Lakers defensive scheme. Oh, cool, we're going to switch everything. We're going to play fast, play lengthy or whatever, and we're going to switch on ball handlers and things of that nature. And for 75% of the year, they used Jared Vanderbilt as a defensive big, which, mind you, if you look at Vando's worst defensive impact season, it was when he was with Utah and when he was used as a defensive big. It's very clear at this point, it's been clear for half a decade now, 5 years almost, that Vando is not he's not a defensive big. He's at his best when he's a wing stopper, a guardian at the point of attack. And you brought up some of the not even foot speed, but some of the loss in athleticism in Vando, potentially because of the double foot surgery. And I think some of that's valid for sure. I also kind of wonder, he just has the full offseason this year for the first time in what feels like forever. Does he kind of get back into form? Because wasn't he hurt after the Denver series too? In 2022?
Yeah. I mean, but that's another thing here. He's kind of always hurt.
Yeah.
He's just one of these guys that's been hurt a lot. But I'm with you though. I'm with you, and I think they misused him defensively.
Yeah. Or some of the offensive usage, again, it shouldn't. Minnesota shouldn't be switching and immediately goes, okay, we're done with Jaxson. No, there's there's several other options we could go to before we completely nix Jaxson off our board, and we just go 5 out and play in isolation for an entire series and let Rudy camp in the paint. So I went D+ for the playoffs. I thought he had a really good regular season, especially down the stretch when they really needed to win some games. I thought JJ was awesome. And I don't know if he got any votes for Coach of the Year, but I thought he deserved at least a couple.
I put him third on my ballot.
Yeah, I think I would have had him like top 4, top 5 even. I think he had a really good close to the season. A very rough situation to kind of get thrown into, and a lot of people were expecting him to fail. And to a certain extent, he like surpassed expectations year one. Just a pretty tough playoff run optically and like tactically for JJ.
I agree with most, if not all, of what you said. I think looking at the regular season, you mentioned a lot of the defensive game plans. I would even contend that the Minnesota game plan they had was successful against
the February one.
But then once we saw that in game one, Ant struggled with it a little bit, and then they started to figure it out, and he struggled with it again to an extent in game 2, but from game 3 on, he was masterful, and they didn't really have another change-up look. Like they tried the zone a little bit, and they just were very hit and miss with their zone in terms of how it looked, and just never quite put it together. I think it's something they could have practiced more. But in the regular season, I mean, you just think about that coaching seat and the pressure and the scrutiny that comes with it. And I've been saying this the last couple of years. We're not talking about the rotations or the lineup decisions or whatever with any other coach really outside of whoever's coaching the Lakers. Like go back to Dalton and it's like the all wing lineup and him benching Austin and D'Lo and Rui and then some of the decisions in the playoffs and like not benching D'Lo or taking a while to bench D'Lo. And then now with JJ and the game 4 decision and like, was he going to keep Jaxson in the starting lineup? All that stuff. Like that stuff is being talked about on First Take and some of the top sports shows nationally in a way that other coaches, like, maybe some of the niche podcasts or whatever are touching on the rotation decisions. From a national, just like casual fan perspective, there's discourse about the Lakers and their coach to a level that no other coach has to deal with. And that's both the gift and the curse of being the Lakers coach. Like I thought he handled that gracefully in the regular season, but like for them to have the best defense in the league for a quarter of the season with with AD missing most of that stretch, either due to injury or being traded, that to me is remarkable. Like that is a giant, that is to me the biggest feather in JJ's cap. And like that was a tough stretch too. They had multiple road trips. They had multiple games against top 5, top 10 teams in the league, and they won most of those games. And they did so with a great defensive game plan and great defensive execution. So that's where I give him the A-, and I give him his flowers. The playoffs, I agree with you. I think they never figured out how to attack switching offenses. That was like you go back to the Charlotte loss, the Utah loss, like some of their worst losses of the Brooklyn loss, some of their worst losses of the season were against young, athletic, switch-heavy teams that just were able to disrupt their offense because they couldn't figure out how to attack that other than Luka taking contested step-back threes. So that's a big thing. I think he mismanaged Jaxson and Vando in the series. I think to your point, I think you need to play more coverage with Vando. And Vando's another guy who I think actually gets hurt by the switching scheme where teams will just switch him off, whoever he's guarding. And Vando's a guy you want to unleash like a pit bull and be like, yo, go guard that guy and go wreak havoc and just lock him up. And I think they didn't even really put him on Ant. That was the thing. Like they put him on Ant more progressively through the series, but I was just like, this is your best perimeter defender. Put him on the guy. With JJ coaching a better series, I think this probably goes 6, maybe 7. I still think they lose based on the performances they got from the players.
Yeah. Yeah, I think we hit all the points on JJ. I'm still really, really high on JJ long-term outlook. Like he just has a demeanor and like a work ethic that like he's not going to allow himself to fail this, if that makes sense. Like it wouldn't honestly surprise me if JJ comes in and like next year with the right roster wins Coach of the Year. And maybe that's like early, but like I'm so serious. Just based off all the stuff we know about JJ and how maniacal. Maybe that's like a wrong word to use, but to describe JJ, but like how
he's a sicko. He's a sicko.
Yeah, like how maniacal and intentional he is. Like it would not surprise me if JJ Redick comes in and wins Coach of the Year next year. And all these questions or gripes we have with JJ are just completely gone.
I agree.
Completely.
Well, Sean, thank you so much for your time. Outside of the Los Angeles Lakers network, anywhere else you want to plug before we get out of here?
No, I think we're all good.
Awesome, man. Well, thank you so much for your time. I'll have to have you on sometime around free agency, and once the Lakers make a trade, 2 trades, sign somebody, something. We'll see. I think there's going to be some changes to this roster that it kind of has to be. But appreciate you for hopping on, and said we were going to go 45 minutes, and of course we went nearly an hour and a half. But that'll do it for today's show. Thank you all so much for watching and listening. For those watching on YouTube, please be sure to hit that subscribe button, turn on channel notifications, and like and comment on this video. For those listening on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or your podcast platform of choice, please be sure to follow, download, and leave a 5-star review. I'll be back next week. I'll talk to you then.